Today is June 6, 2022. Welcome to Native Calgarian. Happy Pride and happy Indigenous Month in Canada. Oki, Naganago, Megoche, Chestokom Aki, or Dekots Nagotine Siku. My name is Red Thunder Woman. My married English name is Michelle Robinson, and I use she and her pronouns. I'm speaking to you on the lands of the Niitsitapi, which is the Blackfoot Confederacy. The Blackfoot south of the imposed US-Canadian border are the Blackfeet, and north of the border are the Siksika, Gunai, and Bagani of the Confederacy. These lands are Treaty 7, signed September 22, 1877, with signatures that include the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Wesley, Chiniki, Bearspaw Nations of the Stoney Nations, and the Dene from Tsuut'ina, my cousins. I acknowledge all First Nation, Métis, Inuit, status and non-status across Turtle Island as the keepers of these lands. All non-Indigenous are treaty partners with the government signing on your behalf. As it is Pride Month, it is important to understand the straight agenda and gendered violence was and is forced on this land by Christian outsiders. Land acknowledgements are critical for creating a safer space for Indigenous, as well as honoring the host as a guest and acknowledging your role as a treaty partner in a so-called time of reconciliation. It's important land acknowledgements have meaning. I encourage all people to introduce themselves with their acknowledgement of their ancestors, story of displacement, how you perceive your role as a treaty partner, a citizen of Canada, a refugee, or other land displacement, so that we as Indigenous peoples know how safe you are to be around. If you don't know how to pronounce your local Indigenous nation's name, won't say your pronouns, won't say your story of origin, won't acknowledge stolen lands, won't acknowledge imposed economic oppression or your role in reconciliation, I determine how safe you are to be around for my community, myself, my family. Understanding land acknowledgements and their importance is literally Indigenous 101 because it immediately addresses colonialism, oppression dynamics, broken treaties, and lies taught today in Canadian schools nationally. That's why settlers and those that call themselves Native Calgarians show me you have no Indigenous 101 understanding. My Dene lineage roots me in the land of the Great Bear Lake tribe in Treaty 11. My people wore rabbit skin, so we've been referred to as the land of the hair people. I'm a native to Turtle Island, and my Dene nation is a visitor to this area of Klincho Tene Indahe in Satu Dene, meaning many big dog town, named after the Calgary Stampede. I was born in Calgary, or in Blackfoot Mohkinstsis as Michelle Elliott, an English name that's afforded me privilege in an English colonial world. My mother is Northern Slavey Dene or Satu Dene, but my Indian Act imposed status card by the Canadian government says Yellowknives Dene. Through my father, I am a daughter of the Mayflower and a daughter of the American Revolution while having a Canadian imposed status card, which is a colonial construct by Canadian policy meant to divide Indigenous peoples' inherent rights. Indigenous Two-Spirit or the Indigenous 2 LGBTQ2+ community. I said two twice because, one, you are special enough to have it twice, but two, because I'm trying to relearn how to say the acronym with the two in the front and not in the back. But old habits die hard. Anyway, Indigenous and Two-Spirit are at the bottom of the Canadian socioeconomic ladder because of colonial trauma, imposed poverty, racism, gendered violence, and land theft. As a Dene woman who attempted to run for harmful colonial parties, spent money to be at expensive conventions, left my home to travel to conventions just to vote on incomplete policies that still allow incarceration, a denial of justice, denial of health services, racism, colonial trauma, and genocide of Indigenous and Black peoples, I have work to continue. Reports to advocate for, an attempt to work within these systems meant to harm me and my community. I can't say, have a great Pride and have a great Indigenous Awareness Month when I know my community is dying from the current drug policies and systems of imposed Christian-based drug policies, abstinence programming, private health care, justice systems built on racism, land theft, and imposed British constructs that continue genocide on Indigenous peoples. Today, Frank Young of Red Earth Cree Nation is still missing with no Amber Alert. I think of them. I hope we honor their lives every podcast. And I hope you all see your role in the importance of stopping harm. And as a citizen, see your role in reconciliation. I honor the Blackfoot as the elders and members have been kind to me on my Red Road journey. Elder Red Crane taught me how to pronounce my spirit name. Leonard Kenny taught me how to pronounce my spirit name, Insatu Dene. My humblest apologies to the Blackfoot and Dene elders and language keepers as I try to learn proper pronunciation. Any mistakes or interpretations will be on me. I encourage questions so that misunderstandings can be cleared up as soon as possible. I do not speak on behalf of all Indigenous. I just share what my journey as I walk the red road. I've been accused of not being kind while surviving genocide. Yet I've given free book clubs, podcasts, and info on my social media for years. So have many others. At this point, it is willful to be ignorant on these issues. My Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. Thank you to previous donors for showing your support. If you value listening or watching and can afford to give, thank you. To those who cannot afford to give, I'd love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com, where you can send in your comments or your questions. Also, giving a review helps on whatever medium you're listening from. I have a YouTube channel. You can go and subscribe. You can go to nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcasts and pin posts on social media. And today I'm very blessed to have two wonderful women join me on my podcast. And I'd like to give you both the floor and introduce yourself in your way.
So hello, my name is Jacqueline, and I'm also here with my sister,
Jaiden.
So our family last name is Pace, but Jaiden was actually recently married.
Yeah, 1 year ago today I got married, and so my new last name is Kahinka.
Kahinka, happy anniversary!
Thank you.
So our family comes from Treaty 4 on Fishing Lake First Nation, and we come from the Soto Bear Clan, where we are also known as Anishinaabe. And we also come from, or our family comes from the Ukraine and Austria. So our grandparents actually came from Austria right after World War II, and they settled in rural Saskatchewan, and they still live there. They were farmers. And on our dad's side, it's our grandma, our Kukum, who was Indigenous, and she married a Ukrainian man. And it's actually quite a beautiful story of the Ukrainians and First Nations people having such beautiful community. They accepted her, and it was one of the few experiences she really had of being embraced and accepted.
Yeah, I think so too. And well, our grandfather passed away when our dad was like 13, so we never got to kind of meet him or understand that. So it was mostly our grandma and then our Austrian grandparents that we got the most influence from. I'd say mostly the Austrian grandparents, because they were very passionate and loved to teach tradition. And so we kind of were raised we're Austrian, and yes, we have a little bit of Indigenous in us, but we mostly know the Austrian side. And so that was really interesting growing up with that kind of dynamic of having our grandma with us constantly, but still focusing on the Austrian culture.
Yeah, and so we actually grew up the first half of our lives. We grew up in a small community called Fort Capel, which is right outside of Regina. And it's actually a very unique concept where the Indigenous cultures that surround this community are interwoven into the community. So the second language of the school is actually Cree, which is cool. So we actually grew up with our grandmother, our Kukum, taking us to powwow. So the first part of our young life was very rich in culture, but I think when I was in probably grade 1 and you were in kindergarten.
I was in kindergarten.
Yeah, we moved to another community in southern Saskatchewan that's predominantly Caucasian. I would say no really awareness.
It's a very conservative town.
Yeah, and so I think that's where we disconnected from our Indigenous culture. Our grandmother helped raise us, so she was a very she's probably still like one of the people we've loved and felt loved most by. And she left everything and she followed us to this new community. So she left her community, she left feeling probably her culture, and we completely disconnected. So that's kind of where we grew up for the rest of our lives, was in that community.
Wow. Okay, we have so much more in common than you even know. So my dad's from Yorkton, Saskatchewan. So my grandparents are from there. And my stepmom is a pirate, and her family came from Austria. We literally have so much in common. It's incredible to hear that.
That's wild.
Yeah. So I totally understand what your love for both cultures because, you know, when you grow up in Saskatchewan and Alberta, like Ukrainians are everywhere. I actually was offended when I went into a restaurant and I was like asking for pierogies and sausage and they didn't have it. I was like, how dare you?
Yeah, do you know where we are?
Yeah, like how does this work? I don't understand. And then it was later I realized that Ukrainians are like, so this is their third wave coming in. And I like think about our families who have like seen so many, like this is, you know, so I guess your grandma would have had the second wave come in, you know, and like there's so much commonality between those. But my Austrian side, it was totally by fluke that my family ended up here, or my stepmom's family ended up here. So and funny enough, my great grandma, our great step grandma, we always called her Oma. And
Oh, wow.
yeah, so I was asking my stepmom, do you want Samantha to call you Oma? And she was like, no, that's my Oma.
Yeah. That's kind of what our mom said. We were like, do you want to be called Oma when we have kids? And she kind of like didn't like that
she was
idea.
a little bit offended as well.
So at least it's a commonality. And a cute story to tell you real quick is that, so when my step grandfather passed away, they have a ridiculous, like, you know, bench and everything, like, to honor him. And so my step grandma went there to visit, and there was this man sitting on her bench, and she's all indignant, like, get off my bench. And it was this German fellow who his wife was buried very close, and he had seen the Austrian writing, so he felt very comfortable kind of sitting there. And then they started dating, and I know, right? And so anyway, when he passed away, he was buried with his wife, and she's still here with us, but I know she'll be buried beside her husband. So like boyfriend and girlfriend will still be kind of buried together too. So it's such a sweet story, right? And I love that. So I can't believe how much we have in common already. But your mom or your grandma, you know, moving with you to that area of Saskatchewan, like, holy, it's really bad. My grandparents were really racist, and they both passed away now. And I have to go out to Saskatchewan one more time to see where their ashes have been placed. So like that's on my to-do list, but probably not this summer because I think I'm not going to Yellowknife for my auntie's wedding already, because we got a notice from Revenue Canada that we're going to owe CERB. They haven't even paid us unemployment for December, but somehow we're going to owe them money. And I'm just like, this is a freaking nightmare. Like, this system is so designed to keep you like not just paycheck to paycheck, but like they want your house to go to the banks and they want you paying rent. And it's like, this is so ridiculous. I can't even. So anyway, I didn't mean to go so much off topic there, but we just have so much in commonality there. And I'm really excited. But my grandma who's Dene, and my mom who's Dene, and my aunts and my uncles, like they've always been in my life. But because I've so much racism come from my Saskatchewan side of the family, like I've had to unlearn racism my entire life. And and then of course, when growing up in Sylvan Lake, it was amplified in the curriculum, right? And then the Oka crisis happened, and I just felt like such a pariah as a native growing up in Western Canada, which is so ironic because these are our lands. Like now it's ridiculous, but when you're a child, it sucked. What was it like for you guys growing up?
Well, it is interesting. I mean, so I pass as very white or Caucasian, and Jaiden passes as quite Indigenous.
Yeah.
So I think we actually had quite different experiences growing up. Like I think for me, it was very. I think when I was younger, I never experienced anything, any bias, anything like that. I would tell people that I had a First Nations grandma, but I think for a lot of my life, up until probably a couple years ago in university, feeling like I had a claim to say that I was Indigenous because of how I looked. And so I think for me, I had like a very interesting experience where I think I felt because I didn't physically represent the culture, I had no kind of claim to even say that that was mine, right? I had an Indigenous grandmother, and that was it. I was Austrian and maybe a bit Ukrainian, but
I think for me, because I do have like the dark hair, darker skin, dark brown eyes, I got so many questions of being like, oh, what are you? You look so exotic. Are you like Latina, Egyptian, like endless things. And then, so that question kind of got old. But when I was even younger, I'd say I did almost try and, I think, dissociate myself from the culture a little bit. I think because we saw our grandma not have the same passion for her culture that our Oma did. I was like, okay, well, then I should just not have that passion for Indigenous culture and then focus more on the Austrian side. And so I think I was almost like ashamed of it a little bit when people would ask. I'd be very more reluctant to say, and I'm Indigenous. I'd be like, well, I'm this much Austrian, this much Ukrainian. Oh, and I'm also part Indigenous. And looking back, it kind of like breaks my heart for my younger self. But at the same time, that was just how it was. And I did feel like when people, and also in school, people would make some like jokes towards like Indigenous peoples, and it would make me want to dissociate further and be like, well, that's not me. That's my grandma's Indigenous, but I'm not. So it was really kind of just like this dissociation with the culture that that was intentional. And then it wasn't until the past few years as well that I started kind of claiming that back. And then talking with our grandma before she passed, of trying to get those stories and trying to get, like, understand a little bit more about the culture. But it was still her, I think, feeling a little bit of that shame where she didn't want to share out of like a protection for us in a way. So it was very interesting. And then since she's passed, I feel like we've really claimed it for ourselves. We've really been trying to learn a lot more about the culture, meeting so many new people, forming like our own community of Indigenous peoples on our own feels very also empowering.
Yeah, and so our grandmother, she passed away September 2020, so just not too long ago. And I think for both of us, it was very much a turning point in our lives. And our grandma loved us so well, and like, it's still, whenever I talk about her, either of us, it makes us quite emotional. So if our voices are shaky, that's why. But we just, like, she had so much trauma, and there were so many hardships that she faced, and she lived a lot of her life off reserve. So her whole life she was neither fully Indigenous or could never be accepted by either community. So she was so incredibly strong, and she loved Jaiden and I so well. Like, so she's
definition of unconditional love. Like, we could, like, if we got a tattoo or something, she'd be like, I love it because it's on you.
She was I've never felt more safe or accepted by someone. And it's just amazing because she faced so much adversity. And so everything, like the hesitancy to teach us Soto, the hesitancy to tell us stories, it was never out of not wanting us to be included. It was always out of protection because of trauma and all of these things that I don't need to explain. But so her funeral, so she passed away in the fall of 2020, and it was easily one of the most painful but also beautiful experiences of our entire lives. We were embraced by the community. We felt so incredibly connected, and I think both of us felt a newfound sense of courage to, because it's vulnerable to reconnect, and I'm sure you can relate. Like, it's very vulnerable to feel, to take those steps and to ask questions because you don't know, and so that's kind of when we both together separately had the same kind of, I would almost say, like, spiritual, like, awakening in our hearts to, like, okay, like, this is what we want. We want this as, it's part of who we are. And also, like, we don't want people to go through what our grandmother went through. So we want to be a part of this movement of Indigenous people, like, walking forward in not what the government says reconciliation, but what true reconciliation is, right? To the land, to each other. And so yeah, that's kind of Yeah, kind of where we're at.
Oh, let's honor grandma here just for a second. Holy. But I do understand what you're saying. I feel so much like I just relate to almost every single thing you've said, honestly.
Mhm.
So and it was interesting when I was younger, people would ask how native I was, and I was like, well, my mom's native, and they're like, well, then you're native. And even though I had a status card, I would be like, yeah, but I don't know anything about that part of me. And a lot of people like you, I would ask me, my background, and I was just okay with telling them, if they would ask Italian, I'd say, yep, because I just didn't want to discuss
Yeah.
it. I just didn't want to be treated poorly because I was native. And in those days, I mean, and today still are, but in those days, that's just how I felt. And of
Mhm.
course, I'm ashamed of that. I'm ashamed that I was ashamed of being native, but I didn't know better. And just so you both know, like I have a lot of my dad's features, so I feel very similar that I felt I was white passing, which is ironic because like I'm so much darker, especially than like my daughter and such. But my brother, he looks a lot more like my mom. Like he has the dark hair, the dark eyes, and the features, but he's super tall like my dad. So I'm super short like my mom, and he's super tall like my dad. So just different life experiences. He had fist fight every single day in school as a result of him being a native boy. And was really unfairly targeted by the teachers and made to be some kind of problem child, and which is really ironic because he was just a kid who was like every other kid, but because of his skin he wasn't treated equally. So but he was also a boy, and then we really grew up in a toxic environment. Sylvan Lake is mainly a hockey town, and in those days it was like perfectly acceptable to be fighting, especially if you're a boy. And domestic violence was quite normalized, etc. So it was just kind of a toxic place. And so just the different experiences already, just my brother and I, and you both are experiencing that too. So I just wanted to let you know how much I related to everything you said. But really and truly, while you were here, I know you have some great projects you're working on, and I'd love to focus on them and then have you, tell people what you're doing right now.
Yeah. Well, so when I was in university, I started volunteering for an organization called Woven, and Woven works in Southeast Asia to essentially combat human trafficking, but they do this through safe homes and safe work opportunities and education. And it's locally founded and continues to be led by local people. So it's such an amazing organization. I actually lived in Asia for about 8 months in 2019. And I think something in me just I heard too many stories, and I had seen too many things to just have my life be, I guess, about me, and about, like working towards, making my own bank account increase. Like I can't, after what I've seen, I just can't, like I've kind of been ruined for the ordinary essentially. And then it was when I got back that our grandmother passed away. And so that's when both of us were kind of set on this path. So it was that fall, my team at Woven, they came to me and they said, we are so challenged in our hearts that we are working in Asia, and that's amazing and it's needed, but we live on treaty land and we are doing nothing to even acknowledge that exploitation and trafficking are rampant here and so horribly disproportionately affect Indigenous peoples. And we know that, this is part of your heart, and you are Indigenous, and we are wondering if you would want to lead us in what does partnership look like? What does allyship look like? And it was intimidating, right? Because I had just started on this journey of reconnecting. And so, but I just felt so strongly in my spirit that this was where I was supposed to go. So I graduated from university with a business degree, and I started in January. And we have this rule in our organization that if you were to go serve overseas with our team, you're actually not allowed to work for a certain amount of time. If you serve long-term, it's about a year. So it's to learn the language, it's to understand the culture, it's to meet people, understand the strengths, and then you can step in and start contributing. And so that's kind of the same degree of respect and honor I thought this was due. We would not step in to help I'm using air quotes
Yeah.
for everyone listening, but we would not do any actionable items until we had spent a year speaking to people, learning and getting challenged and redirected before we would even aim to help. So I just started talking to people, and this is during the pandemic, so it was just a lot of Zoom meetings. And then Jaiden joined in July, but I'll let you kind of explain how you got there.
Yeah, so after our grandma's funeral, I was still in my last year of university, and my degree was very, like, it was, like, my time was all consumed by school. And I still have the hopes to apply and get into med school sometime in the future. I'm not sure exactly when, but that's just always been a dream of mine that I'm going to continue alongside this. But I also got married last year, so it was just a very busy year up until June. And so in July, Jacqueline kind of planted the seed in my heart back in the fall. And so I kind of kept that with me, and my heart just was like longing to do this work, but also consumed by other things at the time. So in July, when finally life started to settle down, that's kind of when we started like, okay, like, we want to do this, like, let's just start. And we were like, well, we didn't know where to start. So we just kind of started reading, started emailing people, started having conversations, and it like slowly, it was like kind of like a tree branch expanding of like our resources, our knowledge, our like little network that we've kind of helped or like created around us. So this last year has been also very personal, because I think it's really when we also started to reclaim our Indigenous identity of being like, yes, our grandma was Indigenous, and we want to do something, but now it's like, we are Indigenous, we want to do this for our Indigenous brothers and sisters, and our hearts are so passionate in that way, and kind of feel that empowerment in our culture. So that's also been something that we've had to learn this past year as well. So that personal side as well as the project.
Which you were actually a big part of, Michelle. I don't know if you remember, but it was a huge turning point for us. I think it was in August. But you were the one who was kind of switched our way of thinking, because before we chatted with you, our emails were very much like, yeah, we had like our grandma was Indigenous, like justifying everything. And then you were the one to say, like, stop talking like that. You are Indigenous. And I think that really, it really was a turning point for us in the summer of last year, like getting started, and how we spoke changed, how we called people changed. It was just like, this is what we're doing. And so I think after that was very much empowered us to really move forward. I think what we also learned was, we feel like we have to kind of preface what we're doing with kind of what we learned, because that was the most important part of last year. The second thing that was the most important was the attitude of helping, which we were challenged by a good friend of ours named Holly Fortier. And when we were kind of talking with her about, like, this is our hearts. We hate that our Indigenous women and girls and two-spirited brothers and sisters are facing this exploitation, and like, what can we do? How can we help? And she said, first of all, I want you to switch your thinking from what can I do to help to what can I learn? Because she said, we are resilient. We already have the tools, and we have the wisdom, and we have the healing practices that, like, we have that embedded in our culture. It's not about what you can do to help, like, it's already there. But change your attitude to like, how can you walk alongside? How can you partner? How can you champion those who are already doing this work? And even acknowledging the fact that we are not starting something new. Like, brave men and women and two-spirited individuals have paved the way for us. And that was actually a huge learning point for us as well.
Yeah, for sure.
But Jaiden, I'll let you kind of explain the curriculum that.
So we also this past year went through Dustin Louis' dissertation on preventative education for Indigenous girls vulnerable to the sex trade. And so we went over this for a few months, and it was so interesting, kind of heartbreaking at times, but also eye-opening. And it really showed that there is a lack of academic research for community-led and kind of like community-led healing in a way as well, and not about the agencies coming in to help, but we already have the resources on our reserve lands to do these sort of things that can also integrate the culture, which is such a huge and critical part of the healing, into it as well. And so I think a few months ago, after going through it and also just kind of thinking of the organizations we've dealt with in the past and kind of just like picking things that we liked from things. And so we kind of decided that our kind of goal would be to create some sort of framework for a curriculum that is like preventative education for sexual exploitation, something that could be led by on each reserve by community members, teachers, elders, aunts, cookums, just people that are on the community, which these children could access easily. And so that's kind of something that we've been thinking of and trying to create some sort of task force to see like the resources that we have on hand, because it's not something that Jacqueline and I could do nor want to do alone. So just trying to find a team right now to do that.
Yeah, and there's like certain individuals who we have like friends of ours who we've gotten to know in this network, but the heart behind it is that what happens so often with anti-exploitation or anti-trafficking or any kind of agency is they go into communities and they're just like, and they're strangers, and then they give a presentation in the school and then they leave. And when something happens that's distressing, it's very vulnerable to seek help. So why would you go to someone that you don't even know? And so the point of this framework is to essentially establish what's already there, but create like a trusting group of people that's there. But in our research, we were also challenged as well. Like this journey cannot be done without people challenging you and redirecting you. But so this paper is very much focused on Indigenous girls. And we were challenged by another amazing Indigenous woman that, you know, you can't address something without addressing or without including everyone. Like men and boys face exploitation. And also you don't even acknowledge two-spirited individuals and how they actually face way more risk, and there's actually almost no research or there's very few services for them. And so that was another thing that we were kind of challenged on. So our next step is to kind of pivot a little bit how we are pursuing this, but the point of it is it will look different in each community. So we're starting with a friend of ours who lives on Morley, and our dream is honestly to go back to our community in Saskatchewan. But yeah, we're super passionate about, you know, the community already has what they need. We have what we need. We're a resilient people, right? We're still here for a reason, you know, and so this isn't about starting something new. And so the other thing that we're working on or doing is essentially, how do we organize collective impact? So we, like we said before, we're not starting something new. There are amazing individuals, Indigenous individuals and agencies who are already doing amazing work. So we're not reinventing a wheel. We're not starting our own organization. But how do we work together on this? Because it's still such a huge problem. It's unrecognized. There are a lot of agencies that fight trafficking, but we need to lead and be supported in this work, because it has to be culturally led, right? Yes. We can't bring healing or reconciliation without our culture being at the forefront. And so that's something that we're exploring as well, is putting together some kind of, and if there is one, maybe let us know about it, because we'd love to be on one, but we haven't come across one, but one specifically for our region of Alberta, specifically for, or I guess Treaty 7, like of our, to specifically focus on our Indigenous communities, right? So that's kind of the other thing that we're focusing on, is putting that together.
Well, boy, where do we start here? So on Healing Lodge, like they may be very interested in working with you with your, you know, maybe a year ago they would have been like, I don't think we can do this yet, but maybe now, knowing where you're coming from, they would be able to. So In the City by Paul Brandt, like you just encapsulated so well when an outsider organization that doesn't understand anything about you tries to help you. You know, I think he's trying to do good work, but like what you were saying, you preferenced about South Asia, like learning about the people and such for a year before even going there, like Mormons, Christian organizations, they're like, oh God, no, we know the best way ever because we're the best and we're the most superior and we're going to go in and teach you all about our religion and abstinence and then your problem solved, no problem. Right. And then it never works. And everybody feels guilt, shame, and all the other Christian crapola that they throw at you. So, you know, it's a real gap, especially in Alberta, because as you know, all the white people in charge only fund Christian-led organizations. And even the, you know, supposed to be non-profit ones that are not religious based, they're all run by white people who happen to be Christian by accident. It's not accident, it's systemic. So for anyone who takes that out of context, like get a joke and figure it out. That bigger picture is that, you know, when you bring your Christian values and your colonial values and your white supremacy values, you don't see the problem and you are the problem, right? So obviously you guys are both well on your way of decolonizing your thinking and working on culturally appropriate resources. And you know, the great thing about Treaty 7 is that we actually do have a lot more funding than I think that some other nations even have, because we have a lot of like wealth in oil and gas and, you know, places like Shell and Suncor are like, oh my God, we want to help our natives because we're Christian and we come with our colonial point of view. And if we throw money, then we can say we solved it. So they'll give us money. And I like that's an ethical issue. Like, oh, do I really want to partner with fossil fuels who are, you know, killing our Indigenous women over in Wet'suwet'en or Wet'suwet'en or up in northern Alberta? No, that doesn't sound or feel good. So taking that money feels bad. So it's hard to determine what is the right place. So I don't know if you've heard of First Nation Information Governance Network or Center. So it's FNIGC. That's .ca or .org, one or the other. Anyway, they are all about taking Indigenous data and keeping it Indigenous, and they follow these principles of ownership, control, access, and possession of data, specifically medical data. So they might be a group that you could somehow partner with as well. Either or, I really recommend any of my listeners or you, anybody to kind of follow those principles, the OCAP principles, when doing this type of work, because this is your work. And it shouldn't be like, if it's sponsored by UFC, it shouldn't become like some white professor that overseed it. It's like, oh yeah, this is totally my work. And these two Native girls just did it for me. That's not okay, right? So we don't want to go down that route. AHS, problematic, incredibly problematic, but they may want to do some sponsoring because there's a First Nation Doctors Coalition, like Health Coalition, and it's actually sponsored through the federal government, but they're specific to Indigenous in Alberta. And they're the ones who are helping me with like my Narcan issue, another story for another day, but trying to access that in a colonial system that's like, no, we want dead Native kids, so let's just not give them Narcan. You know, they're the ones who are helping me, this First Nation group. So I can give you that contact as well. But my bigger picture here is that we have huge amount of following in Ontario and in Alberta. And I'm hoping people who are listening are like, I don't know, they're from Grand Prairie and doing this thing. They're going to be like, we need these girls. And I'm hoping they'll contact you. So what is the best way to contact you?
Well, email or phone. I mean, we're both millennials or Gen X or Gen Z, so we're on our phones all the time. So we can even give you our email to be put into the notes. But my email is Jackie, which is JACKIE, and then at woveninternational.com. Literally how it sounds.
Perfect. Yep, that'll be exactly what we put in our information to send out there, and hopefully we'll get you connected. You know, I was just at I was at two policing events, one with the Calgary, one with Tsuut'ina, and the one that Tsuut'ina had Stephanie Harp, and she's a really loud advocate up in Fort Mackay, And she knows Holly because Holly was actually at that event as well. And she did a full day of Indigenous training for all of the folks that were in there. You know, I sat with some folks and I was insulted actually when Marie Sinclair had spoke, and I turned to one of the folks at my table and said, "So what did you think?" "Well, I don't even know where to start. He's just so well spoken." I'm like, he literally just spent an hour telling you to fucking do something, and your big response is, "Oh my God, he's such a good native that speaks well."
Yeah.
You know? So
Yeah.
I wish that non-natives like listened and heard. But I know for a lot of them, they just work in nonprofit, got the day off to go, you know, sit in a conference and check their, you know, social media. So it sucks. But like I heard them loud and clear say non-Indigenous need to do more. And you know, I don't know. Well, I do know it's white supremacy, white fragility, all that fun stuff of like, oh my God, I just don't know what to do, even though I have all these reports in front of me and all these natives telling me exactly what to do. Oh my God, I just do it.
Yeah.
So my hope is that you can find the right people that will work with you. And it sounds like you have. Sounds like you know about Holly Fortier. It sounds like you know people like Justin Louie. He's great. And his information that he gives is really good. I remember reading one of his points on like there's like, I don't know, 4 prisons or something in the space that he was at. And then all the prisoners get released on the streets. And it's like, this is a really problematic for all the Native women that are right there because they're in between all these reserves and such. And as you know, like imposed poverty is what is causing all of this. So of course we're the most vulnerable demographic in the Two-Spirit. They're so vulnerable, they're not even counted in a lot of the demographics. Like I remember learning about, you know, LGBTQ issues in general and not finding stuff on Two-Spirit because those organizations are still so goddamn racist. And they're like, natives, psh, no natives allowed, psh, no natives allowed, psh, no blacks allowed. And it's like, whoa. So I was a part of Voices. Voices was a grassroots group that was started here when the Black Lives Matter group stopped the parade in Toronto and said, whoa, y'all racist. And out here, at that time, Calgary Pride was predominantly run by white gay men. And they didn't know about the problems. And then here I was, the co-chair to MMIW, talking about Two-Spirit and these issues. And they were like, what's this stupid straight woman doing here? And it's like, because I've studied this and I see a huge gap when it comes to Two-Spirit. And just because you're all racist and won't see it and won't address it doesn't make it less true. So anyway, again, the Two-Spirit have been very strong in their advocacy. I have learned so much from so many of the elders all the way down to the new queers. They're the ones who are challenging me, telling me, don't say LGBTQ2+, say 2 LGBTQ+. And I'm like, fine, then I will. And I also learned, just because I heard it kind of being said, we don't say Two-Spirited, we say Two-Spirit. And the reason is there's a whole write-up if you were to Google about transgendered and transgender, like you're not it changes the meaning, right? So you just say Two-Spirit and that's it. But if you Google it, and this is more for my listeners, if you Google don't say transgendered with an ED, you'll learn how that changes the language, right? And I think all 3 of us here are trying to decolonize our language and how we go about describing. And as a straight cis on Pride Month, like this is like the minimum effort I should be doing for folks that are in this demographic, because you know, I've never had to go through that gender dysphoria. I've never had to be excluded. I've never been having the problem. Like I was always like, yeah, my boyfriend is George Michael. And then everybody would laugh at me and they're like, no, he's not your boyfriend, babe. And I'd be like, yes, he is. He's the hottest man there ever has been, ever will be, blah, blah, blah. And then it was like, babe, do you know what gay is? And I'm like, yeah, that's what everybody says is wrong. That's what I know. Right. And so like the disconnect, I've never had to go down that road of going like, but I want a girlfriend. and unlike a lot of our younglings. So
thanks for saying that,
I
Michelle.
think
We
it's
appreciate
beautiful
that.
to also learn from one another. And I think sometimes now the mentality is very like cancel someone if they say something wrong. But I think it's more important to like through that show teaching, and that can not only teach that person, but like here, the viewers also could learn from that as well.
Yeah.
In a very like gentle and loving space still, which is really great.
Yeah.
And I am kind of mean compared to others. Like when I think of, I met Holly and she's just so sweet and gentle. And, you know, but I really resonated with a lot of things that she said, where it's like, I don't want to be up here teaching you. I'm like, me too. I don't want to be doing the podcast. I don't want to do this. I want to go watch Star Wars until and eat bonbons on the couch like everybody says I can. But no, instead I'm talking about all these issues because we have to. And I don't want to be complacent, because I think being complacent is enabling all of the awfulness. And as it turns out, my daughter is feeling very comfortable not identifying as straight. And so I'm that I couldn't be happier, right? Like, and I can't understand folks who disconnect from their kid because they're not straight and cis. I will never respect that or understand that, because that it's kind of back to what you said about unconditional love. Like, I think of all the crap I put my mom through, and she still loves me, and not like a little, like all the way. And she's just like, oh yeah, that was a hard time. I'm like, it wasn't a hard time. I was an awful human being, like really awful. I can't believe you forgive me. I haven't forgiven me for the way I treated you, right? But she's just like, whatever. She's totally good with it, and that's unconditional love. And I think of that with my daughter. I'm like, what could she possibly do that would upset me so much that I would never want to be around her, right? And because even systemic violence, systemic poverty, like if she did the worst thing ever, I still know where that would come from. It wouldn't be her fault. It would still be the stupid system that caused all of these issues. But anyway, I don't mean to get off track. I just wanted to really emphasize that we are lucky, because like I learned from Holly as well. And I heard that her daughter is like an amazing lawyer who helps a lot of Indigenous people. Stephanie Harp really spoke highly. I'm going to say her name is Billy Fortier. So I have yet to meet her. I want to meet her, tell her how great I hear good things in the community. And I think it's important that we always say good things about each other, because it's easy to be mean, but also it adds to systemic racism, right? And systemic sexism and systemic gendered violence. We don't want to do that. And I do want to do a plug, because we're talking about violence against gendered violence in general, for folks to be reading the MMIW inquiry. If you are part of my book club, we're doing it in sections, just like we did the TRC. So hopefully that will help people. And if you missed it, go back on my previous podcast and you can listen to our, unpacking of some of the inquiry. But of course, it's just better to read it. Yeah. So is there anything else you'd like to share with us tonight or today?
Yeah, I think I would have one thing to say, because we never know who's listening. And I just want to speak to our Indigenous brothers and sisters that our Creator has created us with inherent value, and that like no matter where you're at, you have so much value and importance, and you have a strength that you're stronger than you realize. So no matter where you are, and there will be resources in the write-up of here, but you have what you need already, and Creator has created you with so much value, and you are loved even if it feels like you are alone. And yeah, I would just encourage people who are also reconnecting, because we are very much on that journey. It's scary, it is, but it's such a wonderful, supportive, gentle, kind community. There are people that are hurt, and we're all kind of on this journey, but taking the step is very much worth it. That's what I would want to say.
Yeah, and I think going just along that with like the intergenerational trauma and all that things, I find that me and Jacqueline, when we do this healing and reconnecting, it feels like we're healing something inside of us that like was just there from that. So
it goes farther back from us. Yeah.
So
I believe that in my heart too. And just applaud you both for understanding that, saying it. I'm a big believer that sometimes the words that come to us are thoughts that aren't ours. They're our ancestors, and that
Mhm.
intergenerationally, they're still speaking through us.
Yeah.
I'm a big believer of that. I hear it from our elders, from our sisters, brothers, aunties, uncles, that when they speak, they don't have, you know, uh, a speech. They just speak from the heart. And I'm a
Mhm.
big believer that our ancestors actually do talk through us, if we're open to it, one. But two, that might be something non-Indigenous may not understand and judge us negatively for. But to be strong with your words and understand who you are, where you come from, and know that our ancestors are always with us and loving us, watching us. And that's why we are actually never alone, even though it feels that way a lot. Um, so I really applaud you both. I emphasize everything you say, lift you up. You're welcome on the show anytime. I'd love to hear progress as you guys move forward, and just know that I'm here to support you, and in any way, whether it's through text, emails, or just highlighting some of the work that you're doing. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank
We
you so much,
appreciate you so
Michelle.
much, Michelle.
Yeah, it was such an honor to be on your show.
Yeah, honor's mine. I wish you all knew that. I can't believe anybody listens to the show sometimes. So, but that again, that's just my trauma coming out. So thank you both for being on. Come on back anytime. Know that we are here to united in community, and I'm really, really grateful that you're doing the work you're doing, because it's so needed, so necessary, and I can't wait for this to air. And with that, I will move on, and you guys are welcome to give me any resources that you kind of hear me saying as I go. Always join my book club, folks. If you don't know, if you're listening from anywhere, there should be a reconciliation committee somewhere in your world. Here in Calgary, we have a reconciliation action group, but there are many, Christian-based ones that are trying to get going too. Some are good. Last episode, I made fun of all of them and said they're all hateful Christian places, but honestly, there are some that are trying. And I want to make clear that no matter what you're doing for reconciliation, is it matters, and you can tag me and I'll happily retweet it, as you're either reclaiming who you are as an Indigenous person or trying to do good work of reconciliation. I'm proud that this podcast has given solutions, cultural training, cultural first aid, and all of them to create a safer space for Indigenous, people of color, those with disabilities, LGBTQ. I just did it. To LGBTQ, to, I said it twice, to speak. I will get this, to LGBTQ to speak, plus. I like to say plus, because I don't like to not acknowledge the androgynous, intersect, and folks who just identify as queer, questioning. I don't love to, I don't want to exclude any of them, especially on Pride Month. Thank you to Cheryl Ward, Chelsea Branch, Alicia Fritkin of heretohelp.bc.ca. They have a whole resource page on what is Indigenous cultural safety and why I should care about it. Their work are action tools that I've said hundreds of times in my podcast, so please support Indigenous work like that as part of your reconciliation work and settler understandings. I'm just lucky enough to highlight them and repeat them here. Internalized racism or lateral violence is another form of violence Indigenous and marginalized folks experience by the structure of racism imposed on these lands. Donna Bevins has a great website called racialequitytools.org. They have lots of resource files and a specific one on what is internalized racism. So if you identify as an oppressed group in any capacity, read it. So even if you're a woman and you're a white woman and you're like, I experience misogyny, these are things you should be reading so that you understand intersectionality, but that you also understand that you can be a perpetuator of misogyny. Do's and don'ts for bystander intervention by American Friends Service Committee, so afsc.org. They have lots of information about if you see a marginalized person being mistreated, and point blank, folks, this is like the second podcast I can call out what Mark Neufeld did to Taylor McNally on Twitter. Any one of my listeners have better either retweeted Taylor in some capacity or called out Mark, because it is not okay for y'all to watch the chief of police go after a single Black woman, a mother, and they're already suing her legally. Like, what is wrong with you people that you don't understand oppression dynamics? Holy Hannah. So do's and don'ts for bystander intervention. I mean, we're talking, this is systemic racism, systemic oppression. Holy. Indigenous have been talking about our issues, sharing our traumas and reports, commissions, public hearings, theses, so it can be regularly disregarded. No more. Honor our words, honor the treaties, listen to politicians in their policies and platforms. If they don't recognize marginalized in their budget with gender equity plus, if they're cutting violence prevention programs, services, Indigenous education, uterus health choices, gay straight alliances, have a lack of human rights for migrants, immigrants, folks with disabilities, know that your vote to that party is directly negatively impacting marginalized people. Demand that they implement the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action, the recommendations of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, the multiple reports about child welfare reform and violence prevention, and now 231 calls to justice from the National Inquiry on Missing or Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, and Two-Spirit. Denying these reports is a form of abuse called gaslighting. Our people are experiencing extreme racism in the educational, justice, and health institutions, with multiple reports that say the same thing. Demand change from election platforms and politicians. If they don't understand colonialism, racism, privilege, and sexism, they literally have zero business running. This should be understood by all parties, local politicians, community organizations, sports clubs, etc. Really great articles are out there about being an Indigenous ally, so please Google them. If you're experiencing emotional distress after anything we talked about today and need to talk, there's the First Nation and Inuit Hope for Wellness helpline at 1-855-242-3310. It's toll free, open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They also have a website at hopeforwellness.ca, and right in there, there's a text option. So if more related to missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit, you can call 844-413-6649. It is also 24/7. For non-Indigenous people, there are distress center lines in your area, a functioning 211 usually, and you can also call 833-456-4566. If you're a 60 Scoop, so 60 Scoop, just to be really clear, is a policy that started in the 60s, but it is 2022 and it is still ongoing. But you can go to ssisa.ca for a group that's working on that. And if you are experiencing racism in Alberta, you can actually go to Act to End Racism or text at 587-507-3838. The following are 2 LGBTQ2+ crisis supports that are available in most areas in Canada. You can go to lifevoice.ca, where they have tons of resources. The Trans Lifeline is 877-330-6366. The Trevor Project for LGBTQ youth, it doesn't say two in their acronym, Trevor Project, 866-844-7386. Violence is my everyday reality. Every Indigenous generation has faced it. This is self-care and how I take my power back. That's why I started this podcast, to speak freely without interruption, tone policing, leadership shaming, gaslighting questions, as many people don't want to hear about Indigenous opinions, but sure want to tell us theirs, by people who know nothing about Indigenous colonialism, constant surveillance of our people, our protests, our vigils, and our rights. I and many others share info on microaggressions daily, so it is unacceptable to say them anymore. Learn to be trauma informed. Folks like me are dealing with internalized racism, gatekeeping, and survivors that continue to dwell in their trauma. And even I'm in my trauma right now, and I'm trying to work out of it. They stop people from doing the good work and deplete personal resources. Internal and external racism is an everyday reality for me, and Indigenous peoples, folks with disabilities, QT BIPOC, and many others. Masi Cho to my ancestors, to my granny and my mama, what strength looks like through your example. I want to thank my dad for teaching me to be strong and blunt, my stepmom for showing me what a proud culture is through her Austrian family and roots, and stepping up to teach me to be a proud Calgarian. It is through her I'm a second generation proud Calgarian. Thank you, Darcy, for producing and editing the show, on top of being my husband, my childhood friend, the father of our child, and my support down the journey of the Red Road, he has witnessed decades of trauma, racism, sexism, and to our child who we are blessed to learn from daily. We are honored you chose us. You give me daily accountability to be a better and stronger person. I just hope that our child and my family will be proud in the future of trying to discuss these present day issues in a way that they can understand down the road. My Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. Thank you to the previous donors for already showing your support. If you value listening or watching and can afford to give, thank you. To those who cannot afford to give, I'd love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com, where you can send in your comments or your questions. I also have a YouTube channel that you can go and subscribe. Go to nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcasts and pin posts on social media. And I want to end by giving side-eye to those Calgary rabbits. You're lucky I'm not Tradish. And my beautiful cousin would respond, or you'd be in my dish. Thank you so much, folks, for listening. And thank you both for being on my show.